What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Files podcast, where we talk about our favorite fantasy series and topics. We are your co-hosts, Spencer and Gabe, and today we are joined by Julian from Between the Lines and Sara and Lilly from the Fiction Fans podcast. I'll introduce them properly in just a moment, but if you're wondering what we're getting into today, we are finally here, guys. We are discussing the first book in the Night Angel Trilogy, The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. I don't know if I can speak for Gabe on this, but this is definitely like my most anticipated reread since we started the podcast.
Yep.
Been looking forward to discussing it. I was just telling Gabe that, I was kind of pushing it out until we got really comfortable with the podcast and kind of knew what we were doing a little bit more so that we could have a great discussion on it. But if you haven't read the book, we'll give you a spoiler warning when we get there. But for now, let's introduce our guests and talk about what we've been reading lately besides The Way of Shadows. So I guess, Julian, do you want to start with just kind of who you are, what kind of content you do, and where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Julian from Between the Lines. I have a YouTube channel, which is called Between the Lines, and I talk a lot about books and reading. And it was just kind of a way for me to do something creative during the pandemic because I'm a filmmaker and videographer. So books is one of my passions, movies is the other. So I thought to blend the two and start making some content for YouTube. I also post very infrequently on Twitter and Instagram as well. But currently I'm reading the fourth book in The Wheel of Time. I'm going through the series for the first time. I got caught up by all the hype from the TV show. So I'm on The Shadow Rising, and that one is, a lot of people say it's the best one, and I can see why. Like, it's living up to the hype. It's so incredible.
Nice.
Yeah.
I actually temporarily DNF'd that one because I got
That's funny.
because I got like halfway through it, and I think that part of it was just that there was also kind of a lot going on that I was doing, and as most of you guys probably know, I mostly do audiobooks. And so I was just like, I think I was just listening to it during like a hectic week at work or something. And by the time I got halfway through, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. So I had to soft DNF that one.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a ton of moving parts in that one. It's a huge book. It's probably like the longest book I've ever read. So
Wow.
Yeah,
I can see why. Yeah.
It's like I think it's like a 40 or a 41 hour audiobook, which is ridiculous.
It's in and about there.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
All right, Fiction Fans.
So I'm Sara from Fiction Fans podcast. We're a podcast that talks about books and other words too. And I am our Twitter and Instagram person, so you can find me /us, but mostly me.
It's mostly Sara.
Yes. On Twitter and Instagram at Fiction Fans Pod.
Sweet.
I was lucky enough to strong arm Sara into doing this last year, so
Nice.
she's been very patient with me.
It took some convincing, but I am enjoying myself. So
Nice. What have you guys been reading lately?
We just read Kushiel's Dart,
Yes.
much to my
really?
chagrin.
That's like a fantasy romance, right?
I'm sure that's the genre it's shelved under. There's not a lot of romance in that book.
Oh, really?
The romance there's a lot of sex.
Okay.
But the romance comes in further on in the trilogy. But it was 900 pages, and that's a lot for Lilly to read.
Wow.
If you're
Yeah,
reading
that's
something.
a lot for me to read.
I did make it though. I did make
You
it.
did.
through.
I'm very proud of you.
Man, yeah, that's a long book. I wonder, that'd probably be like a 35 hour audiobook or something.
It's a big one.
Especially if you're not like, were you guys enjoying it, or was it like, okay, what was the final verdict on that one?
I really enjoy the series. I've read it before, but unfortunately, I think I was the only one on that episode that did.
That book wasn't written for me. It's okay.
You know,
I appreciate you giving it a shot anyway.
Yeah. The great thing about a podcast is it's kind of, especially with two people, is like it's kind of a give and take. Like there's been several books that I've recommended that Gabe hasn't loved.
Yep.
And and we also recently did an episode on The Land by Alaron Kong.
And Spencer didn't like it.
Yeah, that's like it's like his favorite series. And so I tried so hard. I wanted to like it so bad.
Yeah.
But it's just it's just not for me.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the great thing about having a podcast is you get two very different perspectives sometimes, and recommending each other books is always interesting.
And I think it's more fun for the listeners when we disagree, to be
Oh, for
perfectly
sure,
honest.
for sure.
I think it's more fun for us too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like our Land episode was hilarious. I forgot how funny it was, and then I went to go edit it, and I was like, oh, this is gold. All right, so Gabe has been reading some stuff. You want to talk about it, Gabe?
Yep. So a while back, probably the furthest book that I can remember, I was kind of in the middle of books. We got to like a stopping point. We had just finished, it was the Foundry Side series, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And so Spencer gave me 2 recommendations. One of them didn't work, and he's like, all right, so the other one was Paladin Unbound. So I read that, and that was like good. I wouldn't put it in my favorite list, I guess. It was kind of a light fantasy, had a good story and whatnot. So that was, it was good. It was like a palate cleanser, which is great. And then me being me, who I am, I wanted to restart the Iron Druid Chronicles. So I did that. I'm like book 4 now, and that's another series that I love. And then just for fun, because I finished one book and I wanted to take a break, I started Battleground, which is like one I'll always go to, like when I'm just like, waiting. I finished a book and we're going to start one next week. So I was like, screw it, I'll just start Battleground. I got like 6 hours in, and it was perfect. And that's probably all I'll read of it, and because we're starting a book next week. So
that is such a, if you don't know, Battleground, the last book in the Dresden Files.
Yep.
And that really surprises me. That's your go-to.
Yeah, it's like
in
my
between
go-to
book, because that is like a massive, like it's probably the biggest Dresden Files book, but it's also just really emotionally taxing and heartbreaking.
Yeah. You know what's funny is that I've like burnt myself out of the emotional side of it. I'm more there for like the battling and stuff like that.
The fire go boom.
Yeah, pretty much. And so
that's a heavy
when I first
book.
super heavy. And the first couple times I read it, it was heartbreaking, and I would cry, and it's so sad. But now it's like I know what's happening. I know what's coming. I've given it all my emotions so far. Now it's just fun.
Gabe's like, all my emotions are just burned down to a crisp because of the like grim dark that Spencer makes me read.
Yep, exactly.
You also read, I know that you probably don't have much to say on it, but you also read Oathbreaker, and I'm curious if anybody else has read Oathbreaker by AJ Recker.
Not yet.
He wrote this phenomenal grimdark book, and so if you guys liked I don't know how much grimdark you guys tend to read, but if you kind of like the darker side of this book, that one is really, really good. It's about a guy in the Knights Academy, and then he kind of realizes he aspires to this dream of being like your typical fantasy hero, and then he just realizes that the whole system and the whole kingdom is like super corrupt and just like all his dreams get smashed, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it was a good book for sure.
So recently I read a book called Sellsword's Companion. And this is kind of I read it. Did I read it right before this one? I think I read it right before Way of Shadows. And it's another like kind of assassin fantasy, I guess. But there was on Audible, there was a free 2-hour prequel book that I had picked up. And then when that big sale was going on, Sellsword's Companion was on sale for like $4. So I picked it up. I really liked the prequel, and I really liked the first maybe half of Sellsword's Companion, but then in the latter half, it just kind of dropped off. I'll probably pick up the second book at some point, but yeah, I don't know. I wasn't super super sold on it. But then before that, I reread We Men of Ash and Shadow by Holly Tinsley. Have you guys read this one? No.
Nope.
Again, it's on my TBR.
Oh, it's so
Yeah, it's very good.
it's
Sarah, what
so
isn't
good.
on your TBR?
Yeah, it's so phenomenal. It's literally like my fourth time reading it, and I was listening to it again because I got an advanced reviewer copy of the next book in the series, and so I was like, okay, I gotta brush up on what the first book was, and I remembered most of it, but I was like, I want to get all the fine details in so that I can go into the second book fully aware. And God, I don't want to say that I like forgot how good this book was, but really like going through it again, I was like, this is like very nearly a perfect book. It's just phenomenal. I absolutely love it.
I
Yeah,
would get I'd be working and I would get a text from Spencer. This is when he started reading. He's like, dude, I forgot how good, and just like exclamation points
when
all the
this
way down.
happens.
Yeah. Do you remember the part where this happened? It's like, yes, I do.
And then I'm also reading in physical copy. I'm still reading We Break Immortals by Thomas Howard Riley. This is a book that's been pretty popular on Twitter lately. And this book is so big that I have been reading it since Christmas Eve.
Wow.
And
it's a chunky book.
It is a
Thomas
chunky
writes
book.
long books.
Yeah. I was just like, oh my God. And I'm finally, I eventually had to get it on the Kindle because like holding up the physical book, it's like a weight in your arms and you're just like, oh my God, like this is not relaxing to be like laying in bed with this book over my head, like slowly falling down. And yeah, so anyway, I got it on Kindle and now I can see my percentage progress. I finally made it to, I think, about 71%. I'm like, it's such a phenomenal book. Like I am so like absolutely floored with this magic system that he has created. It's unlike anything else that I've ever seen. And it's, I kind of put it, it probably has a little bit of tightening up to do and some polishing to do, but if it was at its full, like at what it's capable of, like it's like Sanderson level complex, and like everything just kind of fits together like a puzzle piece, and it's really, really good. And the characters are just completely addicting. Every time I come back to the book, I'm like, I'm going back for the characters because they're phenomenal. All right, well, let's get into Way of Shadows, shall we? This is everybody's spoiler warning if you haven't read the book yet. So spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1, you've been warned. All right, so what were everybody's kind of general thoughts on this book? Did you love it? Did you hate it? And if you did hate it, that's totally fine. We always have that kind of discussion here. If you didn't like the book, that's totally cool. But yeah, I'm interested to see what your guys's initial impressions of The Way of Shadows was.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I understand in this book there's the hierarchy of hired killers, and they definitely wanted to differentiate between assassins and wet boys. But why pick wet boys as the word?
I know.
Yeah.
I could
Out
not
of
take
every
it
word.
seriously at all.
I was waiting for
World.
somebody to mention that.
I couldn't help
I
myself.
knew.
I'm sorry.
No, for
Oh,
sure.
boy.
Isn't that the weirdest? I always think of that. I'm like, that is like the oddest term to use. And I think that what he was going for was like the term like wet work, which is like,
Right.
hired murder and whatnot. And then just like wet boy, really?
It
Really,
does
Brent
not make
Weeks?
me
Like,
think hired killer.
no.
I'm sorry, it just does
Really
not.
Oh my God, it is so weird. I totally agree.
There are some very like intense scenes in this book, and then that word just gets dropped in, and it
I know.
jarred me out of it.
Yeah.
Like, I was so
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Julian? What'd you think? First impressions?
Yeah, I liked it. Honestly, I did the audiobook version. I thought
Yeah.
it was really well done. This was my first Brent Weeks book. I haven't read anything from Lightbringer or anything else. So it was interesting to get into that. I thought it was really entertaining, and it wasn't really because I didn't know much about the author's work, like just kind of getting absorbed in his style and what he
Yeah.
was doing, and like not really expecting how dark it got at sometimes. I
Yeah.
thought was exciting
Yeah.
because I just didn't expect it to go there at some points. And I thought it had some really, really entertaining and fun aspects that kind of balanced the dark aspects as well. So yeah, I enjoyed it overall. But it's been a couple of weeks. I had to return it back to the library a few
Oh, for
weeks
sure.
ago. So I went through this. So I'm trying to kind of recalculate and remember everything. But yeah, I
For
liked it
sure.
overall. Like it's not a perfect book. Especially, I think this was his first published novel, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little rough around the edges, but you know, this is a book that makes me want to read more Brent Weeks for sure.
Yeah. It's definitely a little rough. There were a few points in the book that I noticed on this reread, because this time through I was trying to go through without like rose tinted glasses, because this book is like very nostalgic for me. It's one of the very first like adult fantasy books that I ever read. And so I tried to go through this time with like, a more of a critical lens. And I was like, man, there are some things that do not come across well. There are some things that just don't get explained well. And I think one of the things that I noticed this time was, the whole thing with Kylar, he puts his hand on Durzo's sword and he kind of half absorbs the Kakari. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
and then later on they're in the castle where Durzo is asking him to kill Doll Girl or Aline, and the Kakari actually like comes to him, and that's when he starts like using it. And I feel like that was not explained well, because when it finally came to light, when Durzo and Kylar are having one of their final confrontations, and how exactly did it happen? It was like it was basically making it seem like the idea that Kylar had this black Kakari was like an aha moment, like light bulb comes on, oh, it's the black Kakari. And I was kind of like, yeah, like didn't we kind of get that from the beginning when he took the black off the sword? Like what did you guys think about that? How did that, I'm interested for people that are new readers, like how did that revelation kind of come for you? Did you initially think that maybe he bonded the silver Kakari?
Definitely thought that he bonded the silver Kakari.
Definitely.
Yep.
I was also reading pretty quickly because as I mentioned, we had a 900-page book that we recorded an episode on yesterday. So I didn't have a lot of time to finish The Way of Shadows.
For sure.
So I did feel that some of it was kind of choppy,
Mhm.
and there wasn't enough explanation tying all of the threads together in a way that would let me not see what was coming up, but in a way that would
streamline it.
Yeah, streamline it, make it make sense with what had happened. It kind of felt like disparate events happening that had some relation, but not a lot to everything that had happened before or after.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Because even this time, as I was going through, like I said, I was like, this all seems very kind of disconnected. And I think it gets a lot better, especially as we get to the third book. And what's interesting about this series, Julian, you mentioned earlier that it kind of balances these really, really dark and grim ideas with kind of this lighthearted, humorous side in a way. And that's something that I think is really interesting about this series, is that it marries really well like grimdark with like maybe not high fantasy, but like epic fantasy. And by the time we get to the third book, it kind of like changes over the second book. And by the time we get into the third book, there's still like some dark things and like some grim things that are happening. but it's mostly like big epic fantasy, like huge like army battles and the kind of stuff you would expect from, you know, your kind of swords and sorcery typical fantasy. And so I really like how it, you know, I feel like this is probably a good introduction to grimdark, because although there are some really like nasty things that happen, there is kind of like that lighter side to it. What did you guys think of like some of the darker aspects of this book? Was it too much, or?
I wouldn't say it was too much. I mean, I kind of have a, you know, high tolerance for that sort
Same.
of thing in books though. Like I haven't really read much that'll cause me to like stop reading a book or not really engage with the material, but you know, it's different for everybody. There was stuff that was definitely really grim, especially like the doll girl getting cut up. That just kind of, that took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting something like that dark that early in the book.
Yeah.
Especially to someone as kind of innocent and kind of helpless in that world as Doll Girl was. So stuff like that. I mean, it didn't like it, you know, served a purpose for the story, but I can understand why some things would be too much to some people. Like it seems like it was bordering that line, and to another reader, it could for sure go past that line 100%.
Yeah.
I thought it was too much, not in an upsetting way, but in that anytime a pretty girl got introduced, I knew, oh, okay, well, what's going to happen to her? Let's find out.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Yeah, I do feel that, and I should preface this by saying that I'm not really a grimdark reader.
Sure.
So parts of this book that work for people who enjoy that genre more than I do would probably, you know, they probably wouldn't bat an eye, but some of it felt like it was there for shock factor rather than actually adding anything to the characters' motivations and experiences.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree. Like the whole thing at the, I've always kind of thought that the whole thing at the Gyre estate when everybody is murdered by Hugh Gibbet.
Yeah.
I've always thought that was a little overkill. Just because
to be honest,
so...
that part didn't actually bother me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it gets so over the top. I get desensitized to it.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
I think in this book.
Yeah, I think it was, for me, it was all of the rape that occurred.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yep.
That everyone experienced. And
right.
Yeah, that was a bit much for me personally.
Yeah, I think the one that was kind of like, okay, does this really need to be here? And it was early enough that it kind of, I was like, okay, was the Jarl stuff like Rat? Like Rat, that seemed like there was so much bad stuff going on in their little Oliver Twist kind of world they had there. And it was like to add that was like, okay, like that's a lot.
We get it. He's a bad guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually thought the most distressing in a fun way scene was one of the very first ones when he's still Azoth is getting crushed under the floor.
Oh,
just the sort of slow tension of that I was just so absolutely in that moment and really enjoyed it. And so all of this more actively horrifying scenes I really engaged with, but hearing about terrible stuff that had already happened was less impactful to me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that scene is scary, especially because of the spider that crawls up his leg.
Yeah.
Right there in the beginning. That's the scene you're talking about, right? Where he's under the bar or whatever. So one of the things that I don't know if I want to say that I like it about this book, but I feel like something that this book does that not a lot of other books that I've read recently do is it kind of lets you just sit and soak in like how bad things are sometimes. Like it doesn't just like tell you about it and then pull you away from it. It actually like sets you there, like in that scene for a while. Like near the beginning, Azoth sees that doll girl is cut up, and then Durzo takes her back to his like safe house area. And he's like trying to decide what to do with her and like what all his options are. And of course, like it goes into great detail, like describing her wounds and stuff. But it just kind of like you're sitting there with him while he contemplates, and it kind of just shows you like how bad every facet of the situation is. And then like he explains to Kylar, like why immediate action is needed in the kind of work that they do, because things like this can happen. People can retaliate. People can get to a target before you, stuff like that. And so, as much as I, hate what happened to Doll Girl, I thought that it was a good, I guess, kind of learning device for Kylar, and shapes a lot of like who his character is. What did you guys think of, I guess, how he feels about that going forward? Like the guilt that he carries for Doll Girl's scars. Do you feel like that is like rightly laid upon him, or?
I wouldn't say rightly laid upon him, but I absolutely believe that he would experience those emotions. It felt very genuine.
Yes.
Yeah, it felt like that was, the lesson he had to learn in order, for his character to develop in the way that was, most impactful for the story. Whether or not that's a good lesson to learn in real life that you should take away from the book is another thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the purposes of his growth as a character and the world he's in, it made sense.
Right. So were you guys, I guess, especially for Julian, because you guys read in the physical copy, right? Fiction fans?
Mm-hmm.
Ebook, but
okay.
Sort of, yeah.
So I'm curious if specifically Julian, but anybody was confused by the flashback in the last act.
I did. Even this time reading it, I thought my phone got messed up, and I was like, wait, no, this was like 10 chapters ago, and I like rewound, and then I got to the part, and I was like, no, it's seamless. That has to be there, and I definitely got confused because it's word for word. It's not just like him remembering, like it's like the last scene that they put in there. I got very confused.
Yeah, that took me a couple of rewinds as well. Like that 15 seconds, I was like, wait, what? Yeah. But then like, after a minute, I realized, okay, he's doing a thing.
Yeah,
so.
once you give it enough time, like you finally realize, and that's what I had to do. I just had to wait, and I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that having the physical copy, because I was reading an actual paperback, helped kind of eliminate some of that confusion.
Because it's italicized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it makes it a little more obvious than if you're just listening to the scene.
For sure.
Right.
I actually had that problem with more of the scene transitions throughout the book as a whole.
Yes,
because they would transition like from one screen to the next, and I thought I had swiped too far because it was suddenly a different character.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what it looks like in the physical copy, but like some books, like when they're switching between perspectives mid-chapter, they'll have like a line or like some sort of like dot or something to let you know that you're moving to a new place now. But I don't know if the physical copies of these have that, but it was certainly confusing for the audiobook listeners, because and I listen at like a higher speed too. Like I think for this one I listened at like 1.25 or something, and so it's already going quick, and then it's like Durzo said, and then Mama K was at and it's like what is going on?
Although what I did appreciate about the audiobook is I guess they had enough foresight to start the new perspective with the character's name, kind of the example you just illustrated. So it'd be like, okay, we're in Mama K's perspective or whoever's, right? So it wasn't too terrible.
Right. Yeah.
It was easy enough to keep up with, but I could see that being a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Once I caught on to it, I actually really enjoyed the way that set up the pacing.
Yeah.
And even in a couple of moments, some really excellent dramatic irony. The scenes would actually almost pick up with the same content, but I had to be on the lookout.
The one spot that I really, really liked this was at the beginning where Mama K and Durzo are like at her place or something, and they're talking about Azoth and how he's not ready to be, a killer. He's not ready to live this life and stuff. And Durzo's like, I don't know if he can do it. Mama K's like, give him a chance and all this stuff. And it's flipping back and forth between their talk to Azoth, like basically seducing Rat and then killing him. And it's flipping back and forth and back and forth. And like every time Durzo's like, he can't do it, it'll flip back to Azoth, and he's like got the rope and he's like killing Rat. And so I thought that worked really, really well. But speaking of Rat, did you guys see the twist coming at the end with Roth and Rat?
Nope.
No, but I loved it.
Yeah.
and I'm really beating myself up for not picking up on it, because once
Right.
you realize it, it's like the most obvious thing. You're like, oh, of course that's Rat. Like,
Yeah.
there's no way. But I did not see it coming.
And it's kind of interesting too, because like, you know, we've grown so accustomed to, like, in fantasy, especially, like, if you usually the saying is, if you don't see a body, then they're not dead, right? But in this case, we saw a body. Like, all the proof was given to us. Like, we had no reason to believe that he wasn't dead. And so then for Roth to come up later, and then there was another kid in that guild when they were younger named Roth. And so I'm sure all of us were thinking that it was probably him. And I think they say in the end, didn't Rat kill him and take his name or something?
Yeah. Once, I'm gonna forget his name. His Meister. What's his?
Oh,
it was-
Nefdata.
Yeah, once Nefdata pulled him out, then they did that. They killed Roth and put his body.
Oh, that's
back in
right. It
there.
was Roth's body in the thing.
Yeah.
So something, I may even cut this out. This is just a kind of stupid idea I had as I was kind of finishing up the book. I think something that maybe would have made the story even better, because so Azoth's reason for becoming an assassin, a wet boy, is pretty thin, right? Like, he's just like, I'm tired of being afraid, and therefore I'm going to become the world's greatest assassin, right? And so I kind of thought that something that would have made this story even better was if Durzo had given, because Durzo needs Azoth because he knows that he's a Kakarifer or whatever, that he can call a Kakari for Durzo. And so it would have been cool if Durzo had given Azoth no choice but to join him, if Azoth wanted Durzo to help Doll Girl and keep her alive. And I think it would have made sense to put Durzo in this position. It would have made sense for Kylar to be in this position with the way that he kind of views Elaine. I think it would have just been more dramatic if he wasn't like, yeah, he's feeling guilty over her, but also he has to keep doing what he's doing in order for her to be alive, if that makes sense. I don't.
Can I clarify? So are you saying if Durzo like gave him an ultimatum and said either she's gonna die or you're gonna work for me type thing, or learn under me? Okay, gotcha.
I don't know. I feel like there would have had to have been expansion on Durzo's character to explain why that was in character. Because I feel like for most of the book, he's very adamant about, even while he's training Kylar, he's very adamant about not wanting to have an apprentice, like not wanting to really have anything to do with that. And as a reader, we don't really get to dig into his motivations until later on. So there would have, I think it would have been interesting, but there would have needed to be more explanation there.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree completely. I think that was one of my big notes from the first parts of the book. I was always asking, why does Durzo want to do this? Why is he taking on an apprentice? And it becomes very clear why later.
Yeah.
But that didn't click for me like until later on.
Yeah.
So for that first, however long in the beginning of the book, you're just like, why is he even doing this? So
Right.
I think you illustrated that point really well. We needed to see more on his end as opposed to Kylar's, I think.
Yeah, I think one of my main problems with this book was that the character motivations were not always adequately described for me as a reader. Like, I didn't understand why these characters were doing these things and what motivated them. And I just wanted that to be a little more fleshed out.
Yeah.
I actually think Azoth wanting to be a wet boy didn't need any explanation because he's like 11.
Yeah,
of course he didn't think it through.
Yeah.
Boy, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I would have just liked, even, you're right. Yeah, he's 11. I should just let it go there.
I mean,
He's 11.
If there was more going on, that would be cool. But I was definitely able to gloss over that. Like, yeah,
For sure.
it's fine.
So what did you guys think of this world building? We have Mid-Siru, which is the, continent, and then Scenaria, which is the kind of sub country that we live in, and then we spend most of our time in the Warrens. What did you kind of think of this set dressing?
I thought it was well done enough. I mean, from the audiobook is a bit more challenging, kind of, painting that picture in your head, just hearing about it. I did find out later that there was a map in the actual version, I believe.
Yeah.
So the actual geography, I think, was okay. But I think, I was just suffering from the medium of audiobook. I missed out on a few things that I maybe would have gotten otherwise. But overall, I think it did a pretty good job.
I'm interested as to why you missed out on the audiobook, just because of reading it gives you a better picture, or?
Yeah, I think for me, just the style of reader I am, I like to see the terms of things I'm not familiar with when I'm learning them and kind of memorizing them eventually. Like with the Wheel of Time, seeing those terms of so many new things is really helpful, but just hearing them, I tend to forget them a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, that's just me as a reader, but overall still did a great job.
Right on.
I tend to be more interested in the more fantasy aspects than the sort of political court intrigue parts.
Sure.
So I definitely began engaging with the world more I think it was when we first met Dorian.
Yeah.
That was when I really got completely invested in the setting itself, because I was just so interested to find out, what is this crazy fortune teller doing? What is going on?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the world building. I wish there had been a little bit more of it, and I wish it had been a little more cohesive. But I think as a setting, it's really fascinating. And clearly there's a lot fleshed out that we don't necessarily get in the first book, but that I think Weeks has established in his own head while he's writing this.
I can definitely say that. And Gabe, let me know if you would agree with this. I think by the third book, the world opens up like exponentially with each book.
Yeah.
And I think by the time you get to the third one, you have probably, I don't know, how many POVs do we get in this book? Like 5?
Probably sounds about right. Yeah.
I would think that in the third book, there's probably like 8 or 9, because there's a lot going on that are all in different countries, and like completely, like almost the whole map is taken up with different point of views in each place. And so by the time you get to the third book, like everything is opened up so much and you're seeing so much of the world. And that's what I think is really incredible about this book, is that it eventually, when you get to the end, it just becomes like this huge sprawling thing, where this first book started in, it's like just Scenaria. We don't see anything outside of Scenaria besides maybe a couple places in like Calidor, I think. But you're just stuck in like the Warrens, this really grimdark kind of city. And then it just opens up into something completely different. Which I think is funny, because if you started this book and you weren't a fan of like the grim aspects, it would be easy to be like, oh yeah, this series is going to be like way too dark for me. But in reality, by the time you get to the third book, it's just like high fantasy. I thought there was this interesting quote from Durzo about the Warrens here. He says, the old whore can be beautiful despite everything. This city's got no culture but street culture. The buildings are brick on one street, daub and wattle the next, and bamboo one over. Titles Alatiran, clothes Kalean, music all Sethi harps and Lodrakari lyres. The damn rice paddies themselves stolen from Sira. But as long as you don't touch her or look too close, sometimes she's beautiful. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting, I don't know. It's just interesting to hear somebody talk about the Warrens like that, because you would think that like most people would like hate it.
Yeah.
But something in Durzo, he's been so like jaded by everything that probably the only thing he can, the only thing that like sparks his interest anymore are like these really like messed up places. And so I just thought that was kind of a interesting perspective from him.
I think it does a really good point of illustrating how much of a melting pot the city is too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And how there are all of these different influences everywhere you look.
Yeah, and they're all vying for control, power, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, what did you guys think of our magic system? I know we didn't get too much in this book. Like I said, it'll open up more in the next ones. But do you guys have any thoughts on the magic system?
I liked the slow reveal. I thought that was paced very nicely.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that the glimpses we got were really tantalizing. And I'm eager to learn more about the magic system.
For sure. Yeah, I think Gabe, in this one, I don't think we even saw weaving in this book, did we? We just saw the stuff.
Nope.
The
No,
wet boys-
we did.
It was mentioned, I think.
Yeah,
in one
so we
scene,
did
yeah.
when Solon and what's the big guy's name?
Oh yeah,
Fear?
Fear, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're doing that like bridge escape, and Solon
oh yeah,
does these 5 weaves, and he activates one, and then yeah. So we do. It does mention slightly weaving. It's you get one little look at it for just like a second, really.
yeah. And we get to see Kurok. We get to see a little bit
Yeah.
of what Kurok can do, and that's going to be like a huge, like, I think calling it a MacGuffin would be a little reductive, but it's like the huge like artifact that is going to be a staple throughout the next 2 books, and it's going to be the thing that everybody is like vying for control over. Like it's more important than like a country or a piece of land or anything. It's like the thing that everybody is going after, and it makes it a fun kind of all-out warfare.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kurok is more well-developed than Aline was, so I think you can definitely say it avoids the MacGuffin title.
Yeah.
All right. Well, should we talk about characters? What, favorite characters, least favorite characters, Aline?
Oh, well, for me, I guess I liked Kylar best because we were in his perspective the most. I'm one of those people who always like the main character the best because,
Right.
like self-insert kind
I'm
of
with you, yeah.
fulfillment. One of the characters that was really interesting. I mean, Durzo was super interesting, but I feel like I needed a bit more from him, to maybe get into his head a little bit more, understand more of his motivations. But I thought he was compelling from an outside perspective.
Right.
And then I also really liked Logan as well.
Yeah.
He wasn't necessarily the most developed character, but I like those traditional good guy characters in fantasy. That's more of, what I'm into.
Right.
But yeah, and it's funny how just seeing the characters that I liked are the ones that got taken the most advantage of in the books, like Logan and Kylar, because this is a world that isn't kind to just straight up good guys. It's a very dark and bleak world. So if you're going to go that, straight path, you're going to get, kind of screwed over in this situation. I thought that was a really interesting kind of thematic point about this book too.
Right. For sure. Gabe, what were some of your favorites this time around now that you've been through this a few times?
Yeah, so I would agree. I would probably say Kylar for sure. And I think, I've got a little bias just because it's hard for me to like you said, rose tinted glasses, like kind of just focus on this one where, because I know the rest. And then again, agree, like Logan is probably he's probably like my second favorite character for sure. I'm on the same page as Julian with the whole good guy act and whatnot. And then also like Dorian, getting to meet Dorian is really, really cool. I love his insanity,
Yeah.
I just love his magic, his powers and stuff. And he gets very interesting. That's all I'll say.
Dorian was almost certainly my favorite character in the book.
Yeah.
But I have to say, if there was any character I wish we could have seen more of, it's Trudana. Because there's no way that the way she is described in this book is a person.
Yeah.
Like, what is her side of the story? Because it's got to be wild.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, they even mentioned, because on this read through, like somebody said something about inbreeding. And so like the way that like they described like her look was so weird for me. It's like she's got this like weird shaped face and all this stuff. And I was like, how is she in power? Like, I don't know. But yeah, I would probably agree. That'd be interesting to know more.
I did notice that this book definitely falls into that good guys are beautiful and bad guys are ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty severely.
No, I was just going to say that I really agree with that. And it also, I think all of the female characters had potential to be really interesting. but I do think that they're done kind of dirty.
Wait, there were female characters in this book?
Ostensibly.
Yeah.
I do think that they could have a lot of dimensionality to them, but they end up just being there as plot devices more than actual like people.
Yeah.
So that was a regret of mine. I would have liked to see them actually like stand up as characters.
Yeah.
Mama K almost gets there.
Yes.
She's
Almost
so
is very
close.
key.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think and it sucks to keep saying this, but by the third book, like everybody, pretty much everybody that you read about, like all the people like True Donna, Jadwin, and a lot of the other female characters get their own POV.
Yeah.
And so you start to see them like come into power more and more, and oh man, it's so hard not to give stuff away.
Yeah.
Well, I wish some of that had been shown in this book because
Yeah.
it would have
Yeah.
made it a much more enjoyable read overall for me, I think. Just
For
having any nuance to them at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also really suffers from, I think, the like Madonna horror complex, where the quote unquote good female characters are virgin pure, and every female character that we're supposed to view as bad in some way is a slut.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's funny. I have the exact same note. In my notebook in front of me, that same dichotomy. I was like, when I was reading the book, I'm like, someone's gonna bring this up. Like,
Yeah.
it's so clearly there in the book. Like,
Yeah, it's very true. However, one of so we only get to see her for just a quick second. I
know who you're talking about.
Yeah, we see her in 2 scenes in this book, I think. But Viridiana Sovare is, I don't know if you guys remember her, but
because she was awesome.
Yeah.
I liked her a lot.
Yeah.
I would like to see more of her.
Yes.
Yeah,
She
gets
is
her own entire like incredible arc in the next
Yeah.
couple books, and it is so good.
she is like literally like one of my favorite characters in fantasy, period. And especially like all the way through in the second book, she gets her own POVs. And then in the third book, it's just a ton of Viridiana. And so she kind of becomes this
Main character almost.
Yeah, for sure. She's like an assassin that's kind of running parallel with Kylar. In the way that we kind of saw, obviously it wasn't very fleshed out, extraordinarily, but how we kind of see like Kylar and Aline's lives, how they're kind of these parallel lives of like the different ways they could have gone. We see these parallel lives of Viridiana and Kylar, and they start to come into contact. And she's absolutely phenomenal. I'm actually really looking forward to getting to the second book so I can read more about her. So Kylar, he has this moment where he kind of has to decide whether he's going to be like an assassin his whole life and kind of continue being like, he sees himself as this bad person. And he kind of has a shift near the end of the book. But do you think that Kylar, like, how do you feel about his morals? Is he a good guy deep down?
I think he's a good person who's undergone some really bad circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that definitely. Like, especially being in his point of view for most of the book, like you really understand him and who he is as a person. And he has so many human flaws. Like, you can't really fault him for the situation he's in and the life he's lived, right? So I think, he's done some bad stuff, but ultimately a good person deep down.
Yeah.
Especially since he made some very permanent decisions when he was 11.
Yeah.
Not to harp on that.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to blame him for getting himself in this mess. When
For
he was a
sure.
little
For
kid.
sure. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a way out, imagine just, put yourself in his shoes, right? Terrified every day. And you see Durzo for the first time, who's got it all and he's not afraid of anything. Like, I would latch onto that for sure in a heartbeat if I was 11.
The thing that sucks though is Durzo is like, Durzo was like, all right, you proved yourself. Like, I'll get you an apprenticeship with a Fletcher or something. And Kylar could have gone on to like
That's
live
true.
this normal
That's
life.
true. Yeah, that's true.
And, and I think that's kind of the thing that's missing for me a little bit with the beginning of the book, is because like, I get it. He's 11. Like, of course he's going to make this stupid choice. But also, like, he has all these other options. As soon as he kills Rat, Durzo offers him like all these other options to get himself out of the Warrens. And I just would have probably liked a better reason for Azoth to be, a mercenary with Blint.
I feel like at that point, though, he's still so focused on like the ideal of Durzo that he has in his head.
Yeah.
That he's still like, because as a child you aren't really equipped to make that kind of like sensible decision,
right?
So I feel like he's still thinking just Durzo saved me, I want to be like him.
Yeah.
Durzo doesn't fear anything, and he's not thinking about it like, okay, but what will make me happy as a person?
What is my
right.
stable long-term career path?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, he does kind of have that moment later on where at first Durzo is like, if you come with me, like, you can never love anybody, like you can never be in like any sort of relationship or anything, and Kylar's like, what do I care, like girls are icky. And then later on he just has this moment where he's like, why did I give away like the opportunity to like have real love and affection? And so I think we see some of that regret, and then we see more of it as the story goes on, but he still like kind of struggles with it. Like, I don't think he wants to fully give up the life of being an assassin, right? Like, I think there's something has grown in him over the past several years with Durzo, where it's like, now this is what he does. Like, it's like when some people come back from like the military after they've been at the military for a long time, and that's like all they know how to do. Like, they don't know how to be, a normal person. And so that's kind of the vibe that I've gotten from Kylar. It's like, he doesn't know what to do now. What do you guys think of when it really comes down to it, especially with what we saw at the end there? What do you guys think of the relationship between Durzo and Kylar? I'll leave it up to you guys and I'll pop in.
I think there was an element of kind of Stockholm syndrome that kind of really pervaded this book. Like, he's like the first person to show him any sort of guidance, or not necessarily stability, but a path out of the life he lived as a child. And I think that, just becoming accustomed to that, it's not necessarily a good relationship. It's actually a pretty bad one.
Yeah.
But that's how the story progresses, and that's where Kylar's character ends up going. So, it's a relationship, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But not necessarily a good one.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, not healthy. But
Yeah.
I think
No.
the moments where we get to explore that were some of my favorite ones in the book, where we got to see through the fronts they were both putting on almost constantly.
Yeah, for sure.
I not necessarily about Kylar and Durzo's relationship, but I really would have liked to see more of Durzo and Mama Kay's relationship, because we get this revelation at the end that they were actually both in love with each other, but it kind of comes out of left field for me. And again, I think this is my complaint really about the book in general, is that I just wanted to see things kind of developed more, rather than just be their own separate scenes that feel like they have no connection.
Right.
I think this book was so focused on making Durzo this badass wet boy that we didn't get enough of the breadcrumbs to make those reveals feel impactful instead of just shocking.
Right. For sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we definitely don't get enough with Mama Kay and Durzo specifically, where like, it is kind of a shock at the end where you're like, oh, he loved her. Okay. All right.
If you say so.
Yeah. And like the whole thing with Vonda, like, it set things up so well to make you believe that he was really in love with Vonda. And so when it gets to the end and he's like, no, I didn't love Vonda, I loved Mama K, it was like, oh, all right. I mean, you haven't really proven that, but okay. So I'm definitely with you there. I think as far as Durzo and Kylar's relationship goes, yeah, it is super, super complicated, isn't it? It's pretty sad, honestly, but in a way, the book does make you feel like, in a selfish way, I guess, you don't want either of these characters to part because they're so good on the page together, right? And so by the end, when Kylar has to kill Durzo, it both feels tragic yet inevitable in a way. And then when you find out, we start to see near the end that Durzo really does care for Kylar like a son, like even if it is kind of this weird twisted relationship, like Durzo like really sees Kylar as a son, and so that's also a reason why it's sad when he dies. So you guys said you didn't like Aline, right?
I'm not sure there's enough of her to dislike.
I was unable to form an opinion. Oh, I did think it was funny that she was in love with someone that she didn't even really knew existed.
Yeah. Aline is not actually, I don't know if she's ever really fleshed out, to be honest, but I really like the compassionate side of her. I think that's the part that like makes me like her working with the beggars and stuff like that, and like her outlook on her scars, and like how she views kind of the positive side of that whole situation. Like that makes me really like her a lot. But yeah, I think even going into the next couple books, she's not my favorite character by a mile.
Yeah, like I don't dislike her. I'm like, how dare she be nice to homeless people?
Sure.
That's not it.
Yeah.
But that being the only thing we know about her doesn't feel like enough.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the most compelling thing about her character for me was almost, and it's unfortunate that it has to be this way, but as a literary device to kind of show, and I think you mentioned this, the separate path that someone could take with almost an identical upbringing to Azoth, someone who takes that unfortunate upbringing and turns it into something else, and even someone who has a physical disfigurement, not letting that define them. And I thought that was really interesting. But as an actual person and like a kind of fleshed out character with traits, definitely not the most interesting in this book, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, should we talk about Logan? I mean, we kind of talked about him a little bit, but I think that this time around, and of course I'm the same way as most of you guys, like Kylar is the main character. He's going to be the one that I'm the most interested in, but I really think that Logan was my favorite character this time around. And of course, I have the benefit of knowing the next couple books, but the part that made me realize it this time, the part where I was like, oh man, like I really love this character, is when Solon he comes to meet him for the first time, and he has a duel with him in the courtyard, and all the knights have been fighting Logan, and it's made to look like Logan is just whooping their ass, and Solon just comes in and like grabs him by the helmet and like throws him down, and Logan is like, how did he do that? And then Solon tells him, your guards have been letting you win, like they've been letting you win this whole time, like that's not respect. And so Logan is like hurt by this, and he shames them, and then I think from that they start to like kind of gather this respect for Logan and realize that he is going to become the lord of this house, and so they need to start treating him like a military commander or something, right? Like I feel like the soldiers are gaining more and more respect for him, And this is kind of what he does throughout the next couple books. He is a extremely likable character that people want to follow. They want to like give their sword for this man.
I'm not usually interested, to be honest, in characters who are so nice and good as Logan. But I am. So for most of the book, like I liked him well enough, but I wouldn't say that he was a favorite of mine. But the situation that he's in at the very end of the book, where he's in what is it, the maw?
Yep.
Yeah.
In that pit with the cannibals, and he has to, like, I'm really interested in seeing how that affects him as a person and how he deals with that, and how he gets out of that situation. So that immediately made him more interesting to me.
Yeah. And that is definitely where you'll see a ton of character growth. That place is
brutal.
That place is disturbing, to be honest. Like it's pretty wild.
It seemed unpleasant.
Yeah. We talked about Mama K, right? Oh, so I liked this thing about not only Mama K, but you know, even though some characters weren't necessarily fleshed out all the way, I'll just read this quote from one of Mama K's kind of chapters. This is right after Azoth kills Rat, and then he comes to Mama K's place to like tell her, you know, that he needs to find Durzo. And it says, he was a picture of the naked innocence that died every day in the Warrens. It stirred something in her that she thought long dead. Without so much as a word, she knew she could offer the boy a mother's arms, a mother's embrace, a safe place. She could give refuge even to this child of the Warrens who'd probably never been held in his life. A soft look, a touch on the cheek, and a word, and he would collapse into her arms and cry. And then, you know, after this like tender, like almost tender moment, she realizes that she can't, because like not only would it betray like this kind of hard exterior that she puts up, but also she knows that Durzo is in the room, and that if she were to give him any sort of comfort, like Durzo would think like, oh, this kid is not able to, you know, withstand the difficulties of this life. And so she holds back on the you know, comfort. And so I kind of liked how each character, you could tell that they had deeper emotions, and they had more of a heart than they were letting on, even with Durzo. But because of this world they live in, you know, that's just not possible for them. And that's one of the reasons why I like, you know, these type of books, is because the world usually kind of determines how these characters act. And so you can get a lot of really interesting flavors of character with that.
I really liked Mama K. I really liked her until that one scene when Durzo calls her a whore, and apparently her entire self-image comes down. And that seemed a little, I don't know. That was not the person that we had been introduced to until then.
I think that would have hit better. Her reaction to that would have hit better if we knew at that point that she was in love with him.
100%.
Yeah.
But we don't, you know, you can apply that retroactively maybe, and then it makes more sense. But we really needed to have that emotional like background to it.
For sure. Yeah. And that's probably where this book is a little disjointed at times. But yeah, definitely when that comes around, it's kind of like it's kind of like she's been dealing with Durzo all these years and always held this hard exterior, and this one random time where he calls her a whore, she breaks down. It is pretty weird. What did you guys think of Count Drake?
I liked him. He seemed like a nice, well-adjusted person, which is a rarity in this world.
Yeah.
I liked him as well. I think having him kind of be that a sort of more positive role model definitely helped in this story. The thing I'm really interested in continuing the books is seeing kind of how what he talks about is going to play out thematically in these books, because I know I've just from hearing other people talk about Lightbringer, how there's a certain element of faith in Brent Weeks's books, and having that character, I'm talking about the right character, I hope. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Kind of talk about the elements of faith in a world like this, I think is a kind of compelling idea. And I'm very curious to see how that'll develop.
For sure. Yeah. I think that does continue throughout the series. We mostly see it through Eileen and, kind of the effect she tries to have on Kylar. But yeah, Count Drake is an awesome character. And I loved how, were you guys surprised by his backstory about some of the horrible things he did in his past?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Even I was this time. I forgot about it.
Yeah. I think that's super awesome, because that's like, I don't know. It's just a great story of like redemption. I always like, redemption stories of someone who used to be this person and now they're this person, and they've completely changed for, whatever betterment. And so I thought it was interesting to, instead of going the opposite way and seeing this really, grim, dark, terrible character, and like, then by the end gets them to like a good place, we see the Count, and he's already in like this super like positive place in his life. And then we get backstory into some of the awful things he did back in the day.
It served as a really nice foil to Durzo as well.
Yes.
We're now seeing this person who did get out. It is possible. And that introduces an element of choice that I don't think the characters want to admit that there is.
Right.
Because it's really safe if they are stuck and they have to be bad guys now.
Yeah.
Right. 100%. That's a great point. So what did you guys think of our villains? Like our, like Rad or Roth, Nef Dada.
Yep. The Vertmeisters and stuff.
The Verdmeisters. We don't really see Hugh Gibbet a whole lot in this book. But yeah, what do you guys think? Were they compelling?
Yeah, I thought, definitely Rat or Roth was probably the most compelling kind of traditional villain for me, being that super oppressive source of bad guyness at the beginning that kind of sets the tone for Azoth's life growing up, and then for him to come back later. And I thought Roth was actually pretty scary in his own right, not even knowing that he was Rat.
Yeah,
just kind of the things he did in that one scene when he had the crossbow and was just like firing at people, that was pretty scary, and I thought really effective to make this guy really seem terrifying.
Right. Yeah, that was a crazy scene, because like, what was it like? The one guy would come out to get the food, and he'd be like, he knows that I only shoot like 3 crossbow bolts or something.
Yeah, he's like, he found the pattern, and the guy just walks out, grabs his food, looks at him, nods, and walks back inside. And he's like, those those are the survivor. Or he says something along those lines, and you're like, wow, that guy is sadistic.
Yeah. And he's like, the other interesting thing he said there was, he's like, that guy knows that he could tell some of the other people and maybe save some lives, but then I might change up the pattern of how many bolts I shoot. And so he chooses not to be able to eat every day. Pretty sadistic.
Wild. Yeah.
I really loved the scenes with Roth where we see one of the other characters attempting to interact with him.
Yeah.
And just that sort of almost like squirming dread, where we can tell that they're trying to accomplish their goals or just survive, which maybe is their goal, at the same time as dealing with this person who's just operating on a completely different level. And that sort of quiet antagonism is very compelling, I think.
For sure. Yeah. Did you guys have any like quotes that you wrote down or anything like that? Okay.
I was too desperate to finish the book
for
in
sure
time to actually write down quotes.
No problem. I'm just gonna read a couple of the ones that I thought were funny, or some of the shorter ones. Oh yeah. So I love this moment where Count Drake, I forget exactly what point in the book this is, but Count Drake calls Kylar and he's like, Kylar, I'd like to talk to you about your future. And he says, well, this should be brief.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was right before he told Kylar about his past.
Yes,
And all the
right.
stuff that he did. But yeah, that one is funny.
Oh yeah. And then one of the first times Kylar was going out with Durzo, not on a mission, but just kind of getting ready to become an assassin. It's when he's going to get like his what was it? Oh, is when he was going to see Count Drake for the first time to get his name changed. And Azoth at the time is like, do I have to wear the shoes? Azoth didn't like shoes. You couldn't feel the ground to know how slick it was, and they pinched. And Durzo says, nah, we'll go see Count Drake with you wearing nobleman's tunic and barefoot. Really? No.
That's Durzo for you.
That's Durzo.
One of my favorite quotes was, I think either from that scene or just the next one, where Kylar is meeting Logan for the first time, or sort of building their friendship. And Logan brings up a Salus Thorn. Do you know a Salus Thorn? I've heard the name, Kylar offered. But everyone does. Oh, I think I've heard of that book. Sure.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, he does a great job of kind of diverting that, like, oh, you don't want me to read it, like, you don't want me to just stand here reading it.
Yeah, I don't want to bore you with my reading.
Durzo has a great quote that is just, I guess, super like relatable or adaptable. He says, you get caught up in the past and you're useless in the present. Oh yeah. So then going back to the scene with Mama Kay and Roth, when he shoots the
oh yeah.
when he shoots the people down below, he says she's like about to, or I can't remember if she's about to leave, but he says, how'd you like the smoked peasant? And she's like,
oh yeah,
you did say pheasant, didn't you? And he just like smiles at her.
Yeah.
That was so good.
And then last one I have here that I want to read was, so Dorian says this, and you guys won't know what this means. And, I don't even really know what this means exactly, but Dorian says, the boy who the whole world needs to hold Kurok isn't even born yet.
Yeah.
And so I can't wait to see what happens with that quote, because right now, I guess we didn't really talk about this at the beginning. Brent Weeks, so he wrote these in like the early, like super early 2000s. And then, he did Lightbringer and just focused on Lightbringer for a long time. And now he has another book coming that is being beta read right now that is set in mid-Cyru. And my guess is that it's going to be, the continuation of this trilogy. And this trilogy doesn't really leave you on, a cliffhanger or anything, but there's definitely more story that can be told. And so I have a feeling that quote is in there foreshadowing whatever he's writing next.
If that's true, I think that's a pretty brilliant piece of foreshadowing.
Right?
To weave in something in the very first book of a trilogy that you're not going to use until,
No
books
kidding.
20 years later,
yeah.
25
That's
years later.
bold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also had a couple quotes here, if you don't mind.
For sure.
And I was super dumb and was so excited to finally hear some good quotes that I forgot to take down who said it.
Oh, for sure.
So I'm pretty sure the first one is Durzo and the second one is Kylar, but I could be totally wrong.
Okay.
And they're like cool enough on their own, but I think having them next to each other makes them a little more interesting. So the first one was, you aren't making art, you're making corpses.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one is, who says there are no poets in the bitter business? And I thought that was just so interesting as two different viewpoints of seeing they're talking about the exact same thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
But from two completely different sides.
Yeah. What was the first one again? You're not making art, you're making corpses.
Corpses, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is super interesting. Because why does he say the thing about the poets? There was
I think it's hard for me to remember, but I think he did something in a really creative and interesting way.
Yeah.
With relation to being a wet boy. But
right.
yeah, I can't remember exactly the context, but I just thought that those two next to each other were a little interesting.
I love that contrast. And even, Durzo says all this stuff about like, it's not art, it's assassination, it's murder, it's not art, and just kind of drills it into him. And then later on, Kylar, I think it's when the city is getting stormed by Kalidor, and it says that Kylar was like flying through the crowds, like cutting people up as if it were like a dance, or like as if it was like a music that only he could hear, or something. Like there's some sort of quote like that. And I'm like, that's interesting how it describes Kylar in this very like dance, like kind of artistic way, when Durzo is like, no, that's not what we do.
I just looked up, I want to elaborate on Julian's quote. I found the full thing, and I'm pretty sure that this is Durzo to Kylar. It says, you are making art, you're making corpses. Dead is dead. Don't go for the one shot beautiful finish. Cut someone 20 times and let them collapse from blood loss, then finish them. Don't make it beautiful. You aren't making art, you're making corpses.
Yeah,
it's pretty wild.
Yeah, really good.
All
Feel
right.
free to cut this, but I have a terrible one.
Oh, sure. Please.
Ahem. He was one of the top swordsmen in the realm, and this fat-assed old woman with saggy, uneven breasts was killing him.
Yeah.
I didn't know that pert titties was a requirement for
I know.
assassination.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
He just like disconnects himself from the fact he's being stabbed. He sounds so, at least in the audiobook, like he sounded so calm. He's like, man, I'm actually being stabbed right now by this woman.
Yeah, he's so like just kind of removed from it because he can't even believe that it's happening right now. All right, did anybody have any like favorite moments from this book? Like any?
I like the moment when I think this is right after like him and Durzo kind of figured they're gonna have to face each other, and Kylar goes to like an herbs shop and somewhere and breaks in, and he's in there looking for herbs and stuff, and Dorian and Fier, come in. And I think that whole first meeting between Kylar and Dorian, and the kind of the crazy prophet and Fier, and they got the sword and all this stuff was super, super interesting. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and they're like looking into they use some sort of site to look into Kylar and see that he's like missing his whatever
Conduit.
the thing, conduit. Yeah.
Yep.
And then they basically show him that they're or Dorian shows him that he has the veer.
Yeah.
And he's like, Kylar, like if I show you this, like it's like you're asking an addict to take like one more drink or whatever.
Yep.
And he's like, but I'll do it for you because you're worth it. Because you're the main character of the story. So.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed all of the action in the climax of the book, but particularly when Kylar and Durzo are fighting in like the factory, and there's the steam, and Kylar realizes that they both have chosen the same tactic to try to get the drop on the other one. I thought that was
and they're like right next to each other, but they can't see. He's like 8 inches away from him, and they're both perfectly silent. Yeah, I agree. That was a super cool scene.
And then he smells the garlic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I particularly really liked it. It's not just one scene, it was a whole sequence, but everything that took place in the palace, kind of starting from the king going off on his rant and all the nobles with the poisoning of the food, all the way up until Logan hiding in the pit there. Like that whole sequence, I think I listened to in one go because I just couldn't stop listening to it. Like the whole thing was so compelling. Everything was paying off. And I don't think it's the climax necessarily of the book. It was kind of like the everything in shambles moment. Yeah. But I thought that was easily my favorite sequence of the book.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was done really well, I thought.
And I love how it, it's not like, it's not like Durzo and Kylar kind of have like this one final moment somewhere. I mean, they do have one final moment, but it's not like they have like one big, like climactic fight in the middle of all that. they have all these kind of like skirmishes all throughout the city. They keep running into each other at multiple times, or you know, running back to each other to fight or to talk or whatever. And so I loved how, you know, it wasn't really like this big, huge, I mean, there was like the big, huge moment, but there was a lot of like back and forth that led up to that. I really liked all those smaller skirmishes, because we learned so much more about like why Durzo is doing what he is, what he's doing. So I straight up, like, I've listened to this book. I mean, I've read this book probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 times in the past 10 years or whatever it's been. And every single time I ugly cry every time Kylar dresses as the beggar and goes to meet Eileen for the first time in years. And he like shows her that he's Azoth, and it's like this big moment, like, oh my God, you're Azoth, and you're also like my benefactor and like the person that has been like supporting me all these years. And I just love that whole scene, starting with like how anytime somebody is really kind to like a homeless person in a book, like it kind of like just hits me right in the feels. But also just like Kylar like going there like that and then revealing himself, and then her just like kind of accepting every part of him, even though that he's like become like this really horrific thing that, you know, most people would view him that way. And she kind of absolves him of guilt for her scars, because he's been holding on to this the entire time. And he's like, she must hate me. Like, you know, she doesn't even know that, you know, that I was the one who was supposed to kill Rat. But if she did, like, she would hate me. Like, how could she not? And so then for him to tell her about all that, and for her to be like, no, you don't understand. Like, you saved my life. Like, you got me out of this horrible, horrible situation and got me to where I am today. Like, scars or not, like, if I would rather have the scars and be where I am than not have the scars and be still living on the streets in the Warrens.
Yeah.
And so that moment just makes me like literally tear up every single time. I did like the final confrontation between Kylar and Rat or Roth. And he like anytime, and I've read this so many times in fantasy books, but anytime somebody like pulls themselves up on a sword and like kills the other person, that's always like, I don't know. I always fall for it. I'm always just like, it's always a huge selling point for me, just because it's like,
it's badass.
It's like the most badass thing you can do. It's like the most self-sacrificing, like badass thing you can do. So
I really wasn't expecting Kylar to be so willing to die, mostly because he was the main character in a first book. And I recognize, I mean, having read the book now, I know that he comes back to life.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was like, oh, wow, you're actually killing off your main character. That's pretty bold.
Yeah.
So like that had a lot of impact for me as a reader.
For sure.
That scene.
Yeah, because they and here's kind of a weird plot convenience that maybe I don't understand is I don't know why Eileen and what was the girl's name? Uli. I don't understand why Eileen and Uli would think it was like, oh, like we should just take him back to our house, like, or whatever they did. Like, wouldn't they be like, oh, we gotta bury him, he's dead?
Yeah, that's true. But it wouldn't worked out if they didn't. So
yeah, I would have loved to have seen him wake up in like a grave or something, or like another like pile of bodies or something. He's just like, oh my God, what's happening? But yeah, that antechamber place is pretty wild.
Of the mystery.
Antechamber of the mystery. And then he gets offered the choice to go, like, you can either go back to Eileen and, live the rest of your life with Aline or whatever you want to do. And then you can keep coming back, or one time only, you can go to wherever it is people go after they die. And is such an interesting choice, because the wolf guy is like, eternity might not be a pleasant place for you, depending on what's on the other side of that door. So he even says, like, if you were to stand in judgment of Kylar Stern, would you give him a happily ever after? All right. Well, so I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Does this book make you want to continue the series? Do you think that you want to like read the next books at some point, or is it kind of like, that was great, but I'm good?
I think hearing you guys talk about the rest of the series made me more interested than the first book itself did.
For sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say just that thing.
Yeah, it does get way better.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, for me, it was something I was like considering, because I was going to continue doing the audiobooks. That's the format I did the first book in. I didn't want to change it up. So I figure, I will listen to them at some point for sure when I'm looking for that, to get back into it. But I don't like going into something so soon after reading a bigger, especially fantasy book like that. So I think if I do go into it, it'll be not in the immediate future, but I really am curious to see how it's going to play out. So I'll definitely read it. And I added Lightbringer to my TBR because of this.
Nice.
Yeah, Brent Weeks seems like, he knows a bit of what he's doing. So
for
might
sure.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Lightbringer is significantly more polished.
Yeah.
And there's big reveals and big twists in there. And I think it was, the second book in the Lightbringer series made it into my, I think it was my number 2 spot of my top 3 favorite books last year. And it blew me away. So yeah, you'll probably like Lightbringer a lot. But if any of you guys want a really quick, short, book that's in the, Night Angel world, there is Perfect Shadow. And this isn't Durzo Blint's origin story, but it's what he did right before the events of Night Angel. It's like everything that happened leading up to him meeting Azoth. So it's like a 2-hour audiobook. It's a pretty good read.
I think that would be really interesting to read. Like Lily was saying, the book itself didn't necessarily convince me to continue on with the series so much as this conversation has.
Yeah,
but
sure.
a shorter book like that, like I'm willing to invest the time in that.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
I haven't even read that yet, and now that Spencer's
you haven't?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh, you gotta read that. You're gonna love it. Oh, it's so good. Yeah, because it's just straight Durzo. I think that's the only POV we get. We might get a little bit of Mama K or something, but it's just mostly pure Durzo, and it's awesome. All right. I guess that pretty much was our final thoughts on the book, huh?
Yeah.
That pretty much sums it up. Well, I guess thank you guys so much for joining me for this and reading this book with us, whether it was your favorite book or not. I really appreciate you guys signing on to do a collab with us. That's something that we're trying to do more of going forward. So if there's ever a book that you guys would like to read alongside us, or like if you want to suggest a book for us to all read together, like we'd be super happy to do that. But just thank you guys for coming on today, and we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I know that I've not always been complimentary about the book, but I am
good.
glad.
Honesty is important.
Yeah,
I am glad that to have read it and to have had the chance to have this conversation, because I think it was great.
For sure.
Honestly, one of my favorite things about collaborations is reading a book that wasn't even on my radar to begin with.
Yeah.
And so it's just exposes me to books that I wouldn't have read otherwise. And that's always such a delight.
For sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. This is my first kind of big collaboration I've done with anyone since starting my YouTube channel. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Right on. Yeah, come on anytime, guys. All right, everybody, that is going to wrap us up there. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe down below and hit that little bell icon to get notified every time we put out new content, like our big group author chat with Holly Tinsley, Ryan Cahill, Thomas Howard Riley, and Crystal Matar that will be out next week. You really don't want to miss that one. You can also follow us on Twitter at Files Fantasy to keep up with my horrible opinions on, well, just about everything, but mostly fantasy. And also be sure to tune in to Between the Lines with Julian and Fiction Fans podcast with Lily and Sara. I'll have all their stuff linked below. Definitely give them a subscribe. They all make really, really fantastic content that you are sure to love. Thank you again, everybody, for watching. And until next time, enjoy your smoked peasant.